Hi everyone, and welcome on Storie Straordinarie. This channel is owned by Filippo Peschiera. I'm Iris Perrone, and today we have the amazing opportunity to host Jacalyn Duffin. And Jacalyn is a MD, PhD. She is a hematologist and historian. She has been a professor at Queen's University, and we are excited to hear about your journey and your unique insights into the history of healing and medical practice. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
And so we can start, just let us know where you are talking to us, so where you are in the world right now.
I
And
am. Oh,
yeah,
I am in my house, my own home, near Kingston, Ontario, Canada.
great. And so we would like to know a bit about you and your work. So we can start by you can start by telling us what you do. What do you do, and what's your job right now? Because you're not a professor anymore, right?
Right. I retired about 7 years ago from Queen's University, where I was both a doctor, a medical doctor, and a historian. But my main job and my research was always in history. And as a doctor, I was working mostly in the hospital and the clinics to help out in the area of blood diseases. That was a wonderful job, and I had that for almost 30 years. Right here in Kingston, Ontario. Since I retired, I continue doing my history research and writing.
Oh, great. So in your work, you explore the intersection between medicine and miracles, right? What inspired you to focus on this topic?
Well, I've had a rather checkered career moving from one thing to another. And I was in France because of my husband's work, and I couldn't practice medicine. So during that time, I did the PhD in history, thinking when I returned to Canada, I would go back to hematology. But when I got back to Canada, the hematologists were not very interested in me, and I kept trying to find a job in the hospital. This is a long time ago. We're talking 1985. One day, a colleague asked if I would read a set of bone marrows blind. That means without being given any information or any context about the case. Just look at the bone marrow slides under the microscope and decide what the diagnosis is. So I quickly agreed because I was trying to prove myself as a good hematologist. But when I got to the lab, I discovered that it was not just one set of slides, it was a bunch of slides from a year and a half over the course of the patient's treatment. And it wasn't difficult to make the diagnosis. It was clearly a case of aggressive leukemia, uh, acute myeloid leukemia, which is one of the worst kinds. She was treated, she went into remission, and she relapsed. She was treated again, and she went into remission. And the final slides were still in remission. So I imagined, knowing that the survival in this disease is about 18 months, even with treatment at that time, I imagined that she must be dead because I could tell from the slides that it was about 7 or 8 years previously that she had been treated. So I wrote up my report, I handed it back to my colleague, and I said, "What is this? Is this a lawsuit or is it a miracle?" And she replied with a big smile and she said, "It's a miracle." And she told me that it was being considered as the third and final miracle in the dossier for canonization of the first saint born in Canada. I was
Yeah.
amazed.
And could you tell us more about your role for the canonization of the first? She was the first Canadian saints, right?
Yeah, we have had other saints associated with Canada, but almost all of them were born in France or elsewhere. And this was the first potential saint who was actually born in Canada in the early 18th century. So my role, I didn't realize that I had just been part of this process. I thought that I was doing a hematological job. I was trying to prove myself as a good hematologist. And she explained to me that the nuns in the order that Marguerite Duville, that's the saint, had founded, were pushing for her canonization. She had already been beatified, but they needed a miracle to advance the cause. And apparently, the papers pertaining to this one patient had already been sent to Rome as a potential miracle and rejected. The doctors in Rome said, no, no, it's not a miracle. It's very good that she's well, but it's not a miracle. And they argued that the Canadian doctors had misunderstood the bone marrow slides. And I must say that those doctors were somewhat insulted by that, because there are rules for reading bone marrow slides, and we all use the same rules around the world. And when we diagnose a remission, we know what we're doing. And so the nuns proposed that they find a doctor who knew nothing. That was me. I knew nothing. To read the bone marrow slides to see if there had been a first remission, a relapse, and a second remission. Because the doctors in Rome argued that she had never had a first remission and a relapse. Those situations are rare, but they do happen, and they're in the literature. But a cure following a relapse and a second remission don't happen. They're just not in the literature. And accompanying my report, I had submitted a whole bunch of articles about survival in acute leukemia, because it was certainly extraordinary that she could still be alive. And I was very surprised to discover at that time, 7 or 8 years after her illness, that she was still living. The thing is, I can now tell you, because we are so many years later, she is still alive. Wow. She was a very young woman when she developed her acute leukemia, and now she is still alive without leukemia. I, of course, in 1985, 86, 87, I did not know that. So this challenged the opinion of the doctors in Rome. And I never in my life thought that I would be in a discussion about something religious pertaining to the Catholic Church. But I was asked if I would go before an ecclesiastical tribunal with a Monsignor at the head to recognize my testimony. And the patient wanted me to do this, and her treating physician wanted me to do this. And I decided that I want people to recognize me as a hematologist, so why would I not do it? And I agreed. So they interviewed me. They kept a transcript of all of these words, and they accepted the articles that I had brought, the scientific articles about survival, and they bundled it all up and they sent it up to Rome, and Rome changed its mind. And they decided, okay, this is miraculous. What's important for people to know is that I didn't decide it was a miracle. They asked me if I could explain it. And since I couldn't explain it, it's up to them, the church, and those people to decide whether or not it's miraculous. So all I had to do was be a hematologist, which was what I was trying to do all along. And it was almost ironic that this opportunity came from the church, not from medical colleagues.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Why do you think you have been chosen for this job?
I think it's just a serendipitous accident. I don't believe I was chosen because of some divine intervention. I know that I was chosen because the treating doctor who had looked after the patient all during her illness had become a friend. She is a French-Canadian hematologist. She felt very sorry for me because I was trying so hard to get a job and I couldn't get a job. And so she knew that I was available, that I had time to do this reading of the bone marrows. And she was trying to help me establish myself as a colleague in the hospital. That's the immediate cause. If there's a remote cause, she has told me that many people think she was chosen by some divine possibility to be the treating physician. that God operated through her hand. And that is one way of looking at it, but neither she nor I have evidence to that effect.
Yeah, of course. And why do you think, I mean, you studied a lot, and why do you think it was that hard to get a job when you came back from
Uh,
France?
well, I had not been a hematologist for very long. I finished my training in 1979. My first husband, who was also a physician, was tragically killed in an accident. And I had a little boy who was 4 years old at the time. And I got the chance to get married again to a very old friend who'd known my husband, who had a major flaw in that he was a Canadian diplomat and he was posted to Paris. So when I remarried in the early 80s, I went to Paris and I tried really hard to get a job as a hematologist there, but Paris does not need any hematologists. It's got lots of them. And in fact, there are doctors on unemployment in Paris because they don't want to leave the city. So I couldn't get a job. And as the wife of a diplomat, I couldn't get a work permit. So all of that was why I decided I would go and study history while I was waiting for my husband to finish the term of his appointment in Paris. When that came in 1985, we moved back to Canada, and I was very determined that I wanted to go back to hematology. But first of all, I didn't look very impressive as a hematologist because I had been a mother. I had a baby while I was in France. I did my doctorate at the Sorbonne in history that was in hematology. And to be honest, and I'm sure it's the same in Italy, doctors just don't move to a city unless they already have a job. So I looked peculiar. You could say it might be because I was a woman, but I don't think that's the reason. I think that it just was that I looked like a sort of a half-baked hematologist. I didn't look like a researcher hematologist, and most of them work in academic centers, and Ottawa is a big academic center. It's the capital of Canada. They didn't need me or want me. And so I spent a long time during those 3 years we were there trying to prove myself as worthy of getting the job.
And just a personal question, if I can. Was it hard for you to leave Canada and to decide to move to Paris? And so knowing that it would have been very hard to get a job in France and once back in Canada as well.
Well, I confess that I was very happy to marry again. I worked in a town where I was the only hematologist for a vast region, and I felt guilty about leaving. But I was young enough that I knew I could start over. I was 32 years old, and I loved this man, and I had known him for years and years. He was a very old friend, and he knew my son, and so I was happy to move to France. And I was also very naive because I did not realize how difficult it would be to get a job in France. I thought, oh, and I took letters from my professors, my teachers from Toronto, who are big names in the field. And I thought, oh, this will open doors and I will get a job. And it was really hard, especially the first year, because all the doors were closed and nobody wanted me.
So, what's your relationship with faith, if I may ask? Because, like, you now know a lot of things about how it works in the Catholic Church and everything. So, like, what's your relationship?
I'm an atheist.
Okay.
I was raised in Christian church, but I probably lost my belief somewhere in my teenage years in high school. I'm grateful for the Christian background. It gives me a kind of cultural literacy that I wouldn't otherwise have had. But my first husband and my second husband are both Jewish, and
Oh.
and in our home we raised our children within both traditions. We celebrate Easter and Christmas, but we also celebrate Passover and Hanukkah. And we explain to the children the historical origins of these things. And I think we respect the religious traditions, but sadly, we don't believe in God.
Can I ask you why you're saying sadly?
Well, I think that people who have a true religious faith have some kind of comfort and optimism about what lies ahead. When you get to be an old person, you realize that you don't have many years left, and that will be it. It's over. But I think people who have true faith uh, do believe in an afterlife and do believe in redemption and are comforted by it. I I had patients during all my time working as a hematologist at the hospital. I know that patients who had strong faith were less afraid. And I think there's no good pretending. Oh, yes, I believe. If you don't, I think it's very important to be honest in answer to that question.
Thank you. Thank you. And so, do you think in the modern world there's still space for the concept of medical miracles?
Well, clearly there is, because of all the, I've written 11 books, and only two were about saints or miracles. And of all the things that I've written, these are the ones that get the most attention. Uh, I moved on from this work quite a long time ago, and yet you were asking me today about this experience. And I've noticed also that every time a new saint comes along or a canonization process takes place, Queen's University, where I am still professor emeritus, will beam me out, expert on miracles. And journalists actually call me, and I get interviewed and asked to write and to comment on these things. And so, although I myself am a non-believer, I don't belong to the Catholic Church. Uh, I I see that this is a big and important topic for people in our world. And I think as a physician, it's important for all physicians to recognize that for some patients, faith is a big part of their experience of illness, and we must know about it and respect it.
And talking about these two books that you wrote, you delved into case studies. And like, is there any case or example that from these works left a lasting impression on you, and why?
Oh, it's difficult to answer that because there are so many wonderful stories. Here are the two books. I'll hold them up.
Yeah.
Medical Miracles and Medical Saints. Um, all of this came about because of my experience reading those bone marrows. I got to wondering what did the Vatican have to do with medicine? And I sought permission and I went to Rome to see if I could examine other miracle files. And uh, at the end of my research, which took 10 years, I had examined 1,400 records of other miracles that were part of the canonization process for other saints from 1588 to the 20th century, to the end of the 20th century, in fact. And the case that stands out for me is mine. It's because it's one that I was exposed to. I met the Miraculée. Um, because the church required me to go meet her to see if I would change my opinion. In other words, would I think that she was pretending to have leukemia? Nobody can pretend to have leukemia. Uh, and and we had a conversation, and I didn't change my opinion on what had happened to her, but it is quite extraordinary. And given my resources as a hematologist, I am still completely unable to explain why she got that prolonged second remission, and other people do not. Uh, as a scientist, I would like to have her leukemia cells, which are all gone, but I would like to know what was in them, their DNA, to know why she recovered, because I suspect there must be some biological reason for it, but I can't prove it. And that is the case with all of them. Critics say to me, "Oh, we can explain those miracles now. The miracles from 1700 must be explicable now." And the answer is no, they are not, because the people who lived then did the best they could do with the science that they had at the time. Consequently, the information we need to make the right diagnosis to detect the disease, is gone. And in all of that period prior to antibiotics, even if we could make the right diagnosis, the patient wouldn't necessarily get better because they didn't have treatments that were powerful enough to stop the infection or whatever process it was. So I was impressed also, and that's speaking of all the cases I examined, that the church accepted that relativism, accepted the idea that someday later there might be a technology that could save this patient, but at the time of that patient's illness, there was nothing else that could happen. And every single case required the doctor to be surprised.
So, what insights do you hope readers takes away from your two books?
Well, I I wrote the first one, the Miracle Book, partly because I wanted historians to sit up and pay attention to the incredible value of the Vatican archives. Uh, it's just full of information about medical science and medical technology because the witnesses to each miracle recount what they did, what happened, and so we learn about the suffering. We learn about the medical technology that appears, and when a new technology comes along, for example, the stethoscope or blood pressure, very quickly these modalities appear in the records of the Vatican archives. So it's kind of a litmus test for what is conventionally adopted in terms of science and medicine. So that was something, a message I wanted historians to grasp. Uh, I don't know how many general public readers there are of my books. I suspect there are very few. I suspect that those people are already deeply committed to their faith. And I think that there's a kind of intrigue or curiosity that is satisfied by reading about the stories that I tell in the Miracle Book. The second book is about it was all one project, but it just got too big and unwieldy, so I divided it in two. The second book is about doctors who became saints and why I got involved in that, and it goes back a very long way. And I began by my curiosity about the saints Cosmas and Damian, Cosma e Damiano, and their basilica that's in the Roman Forum, right near the Temple to Castor and Pollux. And it led me into a long anthropological uh, uh, investigation about twins and healing and things like that. Uh, it it's more about the saints themselves rather than the miracles they work, but it's more a book for doctors because it will give them pause as to what patients expect of them or what patients see in them. Uh, because doctors, uh, they're taught to care about each patient, they're taught to use their scientific knowledge to make it work. But we don't necessarily know what the patient is thinking about what we are doing for them. And if you have a patient with great faith, they may perceive the doctor as the hand of God, as an intercessory tool toward the patient's recovery. And if the patient is praying to the saint, because the miracle is not worked by the saint, the miracle can only be worked by God according to these rules. And so the miracle is proof that the saint is in heaven with God. That's what the miracle was there for. And so this elaborate system of perceiving the world surely influences how patients are viewing doctors. And as we said earlier, this is a big thing in the general public, surprising perhaps to many doctors and scientists. I can also tell you that prior to my testimony about the case, way back all those years ago, the nuns told me that they had two or three other healings involving the same would-be saint, Marguerite Duville, and the doctors refused to give testimony. And I couldn't understand that, because if the patient is asking you and you're being asked to be a physician, you're not asked to declare that it's a miracle. You're not asked about those religious questions. You're asked to supply the scientific knowledge. Why would you not? And so, in a sense, these books are there. If anyone gets asked to participate and thinks that they should not, maybe they can reconsider.
Yeah. Well, and I have just one last questions. What changed in your life and in your work after this experience?
Right. Well, first of all, it's obvious I did a massive research
Yeah.
journey as a historian in the Vatican archives. And I went for 1 week uh, just to see if I could see the files. And at the end of that week, I was so happy and impressed that I could see so many files. I got hooked, addicted on going back to the Vatican archives. And it took me 10 years to finish that work. And then it took another 4 to wrap up the work on the doctors. Um, so that was a huge change in my research career as a historian. And I am still being interviewed about it. It will never go away, I don't think. In my personal life, um, not too much changed. In fact, Catholic people are very upset with me when I say that I'm an atheist. And I sometimes get asked to speak at Catholic universities or to Catholic church groups, people after, and they're nice about it. I think they think they're worried that of my soul. They're worried that something bad is going to happen to me when I die, um, and they're also perplexed, just as I am perplexed by doctors who refuse to participate. They're perplexed that my reading of all of these miracles, for which I do not have a scientific explanation, have not converted me to believe in God. And all I can say is that I read a long time ago that faith, belief in God is a miracle in itself. It's not something that you can invent or pretend or decide or buy. It's a miracle because faith happens in the absence of evidence. Now, people who are religious find these miracles, for example, evidence. As a skeptical physician, I lean toward the idea that there could be an explanation if the same thing happened now. We just didn't have the material then, but it was a miracle then, and it's a miracle now. And I do believe in miracles. I think there are things that happen that we cannot explain. And I am comfortable with that. As a medical scientist, I think that's exciting because it inspires us to look for reasons why, like the DNA in my patient's leukemia. But for those of faith, this miracle is evidence of God. And so if they have that belief and I have a different belief, I don't see why my belief in absence of evidence should cancel theirs. I think that these two perceptions exist comfortably in the world. And it made me see that medicine itself is a belief system, like religion. And they're both there to deal with suffering. Medicine is trying to heal you, to get rid of it, to prolong your life. Religion is there to comfort you. One of the postulators I interviewed pointed out to me that the vast majority of people who are sick and who pray don't get a miracle. Most people never get a miracle when they pray during their illness. But prayer still has value, he tells me. He says it gives them comfort. It gives them consolation to the fact that we are mortal. And it gives them somehow an inspiration or hope that whatever happens, they will be all right. And that floored me. I realized it was in that moment that I saw the two belief systems, medicine and religion, as working hand in hand to deal with the fact that we as humans suffer and that we die.
Okay. Thank you so much. Okay, can I ask you one, just one last thing? What do you think faith is? Do you think it's a miracle? Like, do you think that, or
Well, faith faith is belief. It's a kind of truth. And I know there's a lot of talk about truth and misinformation and disinformation, swirling around us these days, and what is true and what is not. But beliefs are truths to the people who hold them. And so if somebody comes to the realization that there is a God who acts on our lives, who can be invoked through a saint, that is true for the person who believes it. And when I came to this because of my boss in the cancer clinic, I worked in a cancer clinic for the last 10 years of my hematology life. My boss didn't like me doing this research. He was an atheist. He was a scientist. He was a wonderful doctor, a really good doctor. And he says, I don't want you to do that. It's all superstition. And I said, it's not superstition. These people believe it. And he says that there is no God. There is no intervention. They're just wishful thinking. And I said, but you can't explain it, using the example of my leukemia. If we can't explain it, and for us, that non-explanation is a kind of truth. He said, that doesn't matter. He said, because there is an explanation and it's scientific. And even if we never discover it, it exists. And that's when I realized his belief in this non-existent, non-discovered scientific explanation was exactly equal to the patient's belief in God. They were beliefs. And I had not thought of medicine as a belief system. So I said, oh, Cliff, I said, that is a belief. And he says, it's not a belief, it's truth. And yet a belief is truth. And it really shook up my thinking about truth, faith, evidence, etc. And I realized that medicine places a lot of emphasis on evidence. We talk about evidence-based medicine. It's a process that originated in Canada, where we compare clinical trials of numbers of people. And I realized that's what the church is doing with the miracles. It's generating evidence to support the hypothesis that this saint, dead though she may be, is in heaven and is listening. And so the methods are almost identical in that they both begin from a point of skepticism and then gather the evidence to see how much they should trust, how much faith they should put in these explanations. So faith is a belief system.
Okay.
Sorry, that was a long answer.
No worries at all. I appreciate what you shared, so thank you so much. It has been such a good talk, so thank you. Thank you for your work, of course, and it has been such a pleasure and honor to host you here on our channel. So thank you so much.
Thank you for your interest.